Hello viewers, and welcome to Spotlight here on Hope TV, where you look and live. And on Spotlight, we always do our very best to bring to you persons who are doing things in our community that are changing people, changing circumstances, changing life, specifically in the direction of light. And there are Christians out there who are professionals and doing fantastic things in terms of serving the community, in terms of representing Christ, in terms of making the kingdom come. And we are glad on this Spotlight program to be joined by one of those. His name is Tim Ngotho, who is a Christian psychologist. And psychologists, of course, we know, do a lot of things to support the wellness of the community and of individuals. And we are glad that he is here with us, coming to us from Invigorate. That is the name of his practice. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And
indeed.
This is the handshake season, so
absolutely,
a handshake, strong handshake,
yes,
is always a good thing here on Spotlight.
That's right.
So welcome. And would just want to say that Tim, in addition to him being a psychologist, he does therapy on one hand, but also does life coaching on the other. He has an array of programs which he does, and wonderful testimonies coming from his practices, and the kind of skill and impact his practice is having. So many testimonies, and we are grateful. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, psychologist, right?
Yes, indeed.
And viewers, as we do this program, do text us on 22232. That's our text message line. Also engage us on Facebook and Twitter. We'll be very glad to hear what you have to say about this big matter of depression. That is what we see to be the rise of depression. And here we are with Tim helping us to just address this matter. Just a little bit about you before you go into depression, right? And, when you hear a practice like psychology, there are people who are very passionate. They want psychology from the word go, Okay. From their younger years, they just wanted to be psychologists. For you, has it been like that? Have you always wanted to be a psychologist? Have you always been a psychologist?
Not really. I haven't always been a psychologist. At university, for my first degree, I studied business. And for many years, I was in the insurance industry here in Kenya. So I was not always a psychologist. There is a time I was normal, like you.
Okay. Yeah.
And then in the business world, when I was managing people, I began to ask questions. In the business world, if someone is not performing, if someone has a crisis at work, we look to the skills. So we say, maybe this person has time management issues, maybe this person has skill issues, and so we take them for more training, and they may well have that problem. But I began to ask questions about motivation, about performance, about mood at work and issues like that, and about the ability to forge relationships and to succeed in sales. And I did not find them in the business training and the business world. So I went back to school and studied psychology and focused on those issues. So I wasn't always a psychologist, but when I got into it, I dipped in, and it is something that I really do enjoy now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's always good to hear about shifts in career.
That's right.
Because sometimes people think that once you get on this line, you have to stay in it, for the rest of time. But I think hearing those shifts is inspiring to somebody who maybe has a passion and feels they have to shift. And hearing an example like that, I'm sure, does shed some light. Now, psychology, and most of the times counseling services, especially in Kenya, when you hear somebody saying that you need counseling or you're going for counseling, usually it's not a very positive thing. And people feel like, wow, you are in lots of trouble. Are you going to see a counselor? What's going on with your life? Just tell us about the take-up of counseling services in Kenya right now.
Unfortunately, I would say it is not very high. However, it is not very well documented, because a counselor doesn't have to be a psychologist. Counseling doesn't have to be psychological counseling. One group of people who do a lot of counseling is pastors. It is good bosses at work when they notice that there are issues and challenges. It is family members. It is good friends. Good friends get together. Some people feel they can talk to a friend, a close friend. They call up the friend, they have coffee together, and they talk about it. So there is a formal counseling engagement. There is a lot of other counseling going on. I have to say, though, that Kenyans have not taken counseling very seriously. And there are issues within the counseling field. Right now, it is consolidating. The profession is being defined and gaining, in order to gain respect out there in the world, so that people can understand exactly who a psychologist is and what a psychologist does. I think that within the next 2-3 years, we will see exciting times in terms of people knowing exactly who is a qualified psychologist, where that person is found, and what they do, because there are again different fields in psychology.
Yeah.
So I am hoping that within the next few years, when the field consolidates, when the laws that are in the pipeline come into force, there will be much more vibrance, there will be much more activity, and there will be much more knowledge by the population about counseling services.
And just when you're at it, my mind is stuck at something you've talked about, that some of the people who do counseling, there's a variety of them, including pastors, right?
Yes.
And pastors, of course, are trusted by people quite a bit. But we have known of cases where counseling has gone bad, right? Yeah. Somebody has gone to see a pastor, but a pastor may, took the issue in a really, on a wrong platform, and instead of the person becoming better, becomes worse, and deterioration instead of improvement. Now, what is the room, especially for pastors who've not gone, what is the necessity of the pastors, especially who've not gone through a formal class of counseling, to take that up?
I would say that one very important trait, in fact, the big trait in counseling is empathy. The ability to put oneself in the shoes of another and help him walk. Now, as if you are that person. So you get into the shoes of another, and as if you are that person, without losing the as if. You don't get subsumed, you don't get swallowed in my problems when you come to counsel me. And that can be very difficult for people who are not trained in counseling. So pastoral counseling is a course that is taught in a lot of Bible schools, in theological colleges, and even in other religions. It is trained. People are trained how to counsel, how to help people. And so it is important that every person to whom people can come for counseling, for emotional support, for help, has some training in counseling, but also they possess that characteristic of empathy, so that they are able to understand where a person is. That way, they are able to walk that way.
Okay.
Now, so counseling can go wrong. It can go very wrong, especially if it's on issues.
Can you give us an example of like a counseling situation gone wrong? Can you imagine one?
Well, first of all, is when one goes to the wrong professional. Even within counseling, there are professions and specializations. For instance, one could have a bipolar disorder, or some of the sicknesses, schizophrenia, and they go to a psychologist. Now, a psychologist, a counseling psychologist, a clinical psychologist cannot prescribe medication, but they have a client here. If one is selfish, they may not refer to the right professional. And so you are working with one may be working with a person here who is in clear need of medication to go to a psychiatrist. Now, once the person goes to a psychiatrist, they may be referred back now to a psychologist to help them and those who live with them and their loved ones walk the journey of mental illness, and also learn how to cope. There are methods like cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps the individual plan their lives and plan how to walk that. And that's the realm of a psychologist. But if the psychologist doesn't realize that this person needs chemical balance, needs to be in touch with reality, which only medication can do, then it can go very, very wrong.
Okay.
Another one is if one goes to a counselor who is not qualified, who is not experienced, who becomes directive. Instead of helping a person gain insight, that is what the counseling process. We work with a person and the person gains insight. When a client comes to me, I am not looking for a job. I don't want to see that person every day, every month of the year. I actually do only 8 sessions for a start.
Yeah.
And within 8 sessions, by the 5th sessions, we begin to stagger. Weekly sessions, we begin to stagger so that the person can live by themselves, they can gain insight and start propelling themselves, start moving forward and start growing. It's a growth process. So things can go very wrong. The other one, of course, is where...
There's something you talked about when the counselor becomes one who is directive?
Yes.
What does directive mean?
The counseling process is one of realization, of growth, of gaining insight. I might know from experience or from learning what is... I might think I know what is good for a client. And so if a client comes, we could have a 10-minute session. Go and do this, go and do that, go and do that.
Kind of a prescriptive, you know.
Prescriptive, you know. But
instead of the person, you know, being
yes,
gaining insight in their own lives and all
yes,
that. Okay, interesting.
So we ask a lot of questions, even if we know the answer, so that the person can work through the issues. We give a lot of homework. Can you go and do this? Can you try, you know, now that you have seen that this can work in your marriage, can you do these 3 things? Can you, every morning, can you try this? Can you hug your wife every morning? Can you do what pleases your husband? And then we meet the following week.
And then we can review.
We can review.
All right, interesting. And it's to actually know that counseling can go bad. And so it's a very delicate process. Still at it, just before we go into the matter of depression, you know, you've been in this practice for about 20 years,
close
right?
to that, yes.
Close to 20 years. That's long enough for you to know that you're familiar, to be familiar with the area.
That's right.
And what we want to gain from you is, over the years, 20 years or so, that you've been in this practice, the landscape of issues. How has it changed over the years? Because those are almost 2 generations, you know, at the rate at which generations are changing.
Yes.
I mean, 20 years is a long time. So what are the trends in terms of your experiences?
The trends are that we will have to admit that we live in times of stress, and we have lived through times of stress. The world is becoming much more competitive. Think about the youth. 20 years ago, it was very easy for a young man or a young woman to graduate and go and get a job. It is not so certain today. Other challenges, like, so there is the issue of opportunities, employment, and that brings a challenge in terms of hope and optimism in the people. Success in career, success in life, and happiness come from hope, having hope, and being optimistic that I am going somewhere, and I have the energy, I have the will, and I have the incentive to move forward. That helps a lot of people, and it gives them energy not to sit and brood, but to stand, walk, and move. And so, in terms of hope and optimism, I have seen over the years, a bit less hope and a bit less of optimism. But the other is a cultural shift and within the society. And I'm not saying that people are much more cultural in 2002 than they are today. But the culture is changing. And in terms of the culture, people, first with technology, people now are more likely to get solutions in technology. To go, if I have a question, it is easier for me to go to Google. Even for young children, they rely a lot on technology, and I spend a lot of time at the computer, at the telephone. And therefore, with this changing culture, there are values that are coming to the fore that were not there before. So some of the issues, for instance, that I am dealing with as far as young people are concerned, they were not as big in 2002 as they are now. For instance, the assail on the youth on issues like pornography. You know, it's just a click away. Even then it was, but it was not as big. It is a click away. There are, you know, recently there were programs on the phones and computers that encouraged the youth to commit suicide. So there is a lot in terms of information. There is information coming from all directions. And so the traditional sources of information, parents, books, church, friends, have retreated, have been put a little on the side.
They've been overtaken.
They've been overtaken. And information is coming from everywhere, from any part of the world, and very, very quickly.
It's interesting that what you say, that we live in a much more competitive world.
Correct.
Actually, the word you've used is that we are actually in a more stressful world.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The environment is more stressful.
Correct.
And that there are new with information. You know, there are new opportunities for you know, like lack of wellness. For instance, you talk about pornography,
yes,
which that was existing then, but now has become more because of technology and all that. And that's interesting. You know, people just having less hope. You know, being more pessimistic, and especially when you're young. Because that's a paradox. Because you're young, you're supposed to be full of energy and hope, right? But you're young and you're pessimistic, which is a kind of an interesting confluence there. Now, about family life trends, can you assess that 20 years ago and now?
More with the young people, relativity is creeping in. We begin to live, even here in Kenya, in a post-modern world where values are relative. So when couples come together, their hope for permanence, relativity says it is what makes me feel good. I will do what makes feel good. There's no good or bad, no right or wrong, no sin or righteousness. It is what makes me feel good. And one doesn't have to refer to superior authorities, to submit to authority. What makes one feel good is what one should be doing. And that is creeping in marriage. And therefore, traditional permanence, expectations that a young man is getting into marriage, and come what may, they will stick in that marriage the way their parents did. They celebrated 50 years of marriage. A lot of young people don't enter marriage with that expectation on permanency. But I have to say, again, you don't condemn a generation. There are 7,000 in Israel who
have not bowed down
to Baal. But there is a sense in which even with Christians, with young Christian people, I have seen less hope in marriage and less expectation of permanence and relativity, and therefore a bit of preoccupation with self instead of the other person. Those are things that we need to watch, because they are not just affecting the youth. They are affecting the older people because they are bombarded with the same cultural message. So even those who were there 20, 30 years ago, and now they are here, they are still bombarded, and their values are challenged on a daily basis.
Which is interesting. That is interesting. And I wonder how many people are able to understand these trends, because unless you understand the trends, then you will not be able to even solve the challenge, for instance, of permanency of marriage, which is interesting. And you know, you mentioned young Christians having less hope. Again, the paradox becomes even more difficult because you're young, and you're a Christian, and how is it that you are able to, you know, you're in the church, right? Which is supposed to be a hope-building institution, and then you're also suffering, you know, this kind of pessimism. What's the gap?
I think the gap has to do with the faith. You know, Christ in us, the hope of glory. The fact that when we have faith, when we come to Christ and we have faith, we are saying we get our lives sorted out, not just for now, but for the next 1 million years, if you like, for eternity. And therefore, living life from the perspective of eternity is a great thing, because if you are assured of the next 50 years, then the next 1 year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years of marriage, of career, of family, will be sorted out by the bigger hope that we have. Any challenges coming in today, we would be able to focus on the bigger picture, which is eternity, which is the hope that faith brings. Unfortunately, if we allow ourselves to be embroiled and taken up by the culture, then, you know, it is what we are doing, it is what is on my computer, it is the current message for today, then I will be moving up and down, because today this is the message, tomorrow today there is hope, tomorrow there isn't. We can live in fear and worry.
Even if we are in the faith.
Even if we are in the faith. And we can get many stressors, and those will lead us right into depression. So it is possible, even for a believer, to get into depression because of the challenges that we face. And they are increasingly more and different, coming from different sources.
You know, now they talked about this, and you know, my mind is in every place now, because if one who is in the faith, you know, that the faith does not help them to stay out of depression, you know, that there's a gap there that I you know, totally feel that pastors must address, because the kind of faith that people need in a stressful generation. I mean, that's an issue that, you know, pastors really must, and theologians must really look into. Another, because you mentioned depression, you know, the rise and rise of depression. And as you say, it's not discriminative, even amongst people of faith. You know, there's depression going on there in a kind of a ravaging kind of way. Now, why depression, Tim, and why now?
Well, depression is the natural consequence of what is happening. So we experience stress on a daily basis, and one of the reactions will be depression. Think about the pressures of everyday life, which are more than possibly they were a generation ago. Think about coming to Nairobi, to the city center, in the traffic, in the morning, and taking 2 hours to get there. Think about economic challenges, economic challenges. Think about the competition in the workplace, competition for skills. Think about joblessness and issues like that. And again, think about the messages that we get every day. And I know you are in the media, and you see, we watch the news every day, and the news is not good often. So I got to work in the morning after 2 hours in the traffic. I was late, and I have much more to do within a shorter time. There is competition in the business, and then I go home. I sit, have dinner. I want to sit back and relax at 9 a.m. and the news. Item after item, you know, prime time news. That is what I hear. It is about risk, it's about danger, it's about accidents, it's about hopelessness in society. That makes it very difficult for life.
Okay.
There are many stresses, and those stress points are assailed every day by what I go through, by what I see, by what I hear.
Okay. So the society is full of lots of stressors.
Yes.
And you never know quite which is the trigger.
That's right. Yeah.
The condition. So depression.
Yes.
Is it a state of mind? Is it a disease? Tell us.
It is the state of mind brings illness. Depression is illness. And obviously there will be different levels. It will be a continuum from one who is a little stressed to full-blown depression and full-blown mental disorders. I mean, it's the whole spectrum to disorders like bipolar, schizophrenia, and the others. And depression itself, you can have major depression or minor depression, depending on the category. So it's a wide spectrum. And when we have depression, it is sadness, continuing a state, is a state of continuing sadness and loss of interest in life. And that loss of interest comes in and prevents there are many symptoms of depression, of course, but the fact that one doesn't have much energy, doesn't have much interest, and is in a low mood, it is manifests in different ways, and sometimes it can be debilitating. It can affect one in terms of work, in terms of relationships.
You know, your definition, Tim, is very clear. A continuous state of sadness.
Yeah.
And then it would be good if our viewers learned about the specific signs that show that now you're in this illness now.
Yeah. There are many symptoms of depression. And by the way, to be clinically diagnosed as depressed, they have to continue for a period of more than 2 weeks. So one may say, I am depressed today. That is not a diagnosis.
Or you depress me.
You depress me, and you just walked in 5 minutes ago. Maybe we didn't know each other. There is no way that if I lose a bit of my mood after an encounter, I have been depressed. But that's language, and language is important as well. One is, as we said, sadness and the mood, low mood, so that one is low, and that brings with it other things. One is loss of interest in things that one previously enjoyed. What we see when one begins to get depressed is a retreat from things that one enjoyed. I don't know what you enjoy doing, or places you enjoy going to, the outdoors, friends. One retreats and doesn't want to get involved in the same things, in the people that one used to be engaged with before. And that comes with a loss of energy. That's why, you know, if you have a friend and you haven't seen him or her for a long time, it's good to call on them, or a family member, and find out, why is it that I used to meet this person walking, jogging, in meetings, in church, in community, and I don't see them anymore. And there is loss of energy. The other is purposeless physical activity. One may be engaged in purposeless physical activity and loss of and waste of time. People sometimes feel guilty and worthless. Depression affects the self-image of a person. Our image helps us project ourselves to the world, project our skills, project our talent, project our personality, so we can bond with people, we can work, we can do different things because we have a positive self-image. Well, depression dents that, and the worth and the value of a person is reduced. The other is guilt, and this could be from anything, from whatever incident it was that led to the depression, or even from the fact that one is retreated from the people. So that is depression breeding more depression, that I am feeling this way and I'm feeling guilty about it. And so what I am feeling is making me feeling worse, that it can roll, it can snowball because of how I'm feeling and the feelings of guilt. The other is difficulty concentrating and thinking. You have people who are very clear-minded, but now their thought patterns, their concentration is disturbed. And finally is suicide ideation. People begin to think that death is better than life. That maybe it is time they exited the world, that they are a bother to people. Now you can see what is happening. There is guilt, there is depression, there is guilt, and now one is getting more depressed because one feels that that he or she is being a burden to the other people. So there is a sense in which depression works itself bigger and bigger as one rolls on. But it finally does come to that crisis point, which is suicide ideation. The fact that now one says life is not worth living, one has come to the end of life. There is no more to it. One has come to the end of it, so one must somehow exit. And that is a catastrophic moment.
It's a whole lot of things. And the viewers would also want to know, there's a whole list of experiences, so to speak. Is there like the big one? Is there like the like this is now, either one or two that you can see, if you feel this way, then this is big. Please check yourself in someplace. The big two or the big one?
All of them lead there. And so it is important to be able to check ourselves from time to time. How are we feeling? How are we reacting to situations and to other people? How are we thinking, acting, behaving, and how are we doing things? To continuously be aware what is happening, to continuously be aware of our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and our actions. Because in there, we might find that we have the triggers of even greater levels of depression. I would say that suicide ideation is the big one. Because, you see, we can help people, and their families can help, their friends can help, as long as we have them. If they commit suicide, they are gone. And whether they succeed or not, when one has attempted suicide, then they've gone to a level, perhaps now that's a clinical, that's now a clinical level, and they may be at a point where now we can participate in their recovery, yet they do need professionals. They need to see the professionals who will help them deal with suicide ideation.
The suicide ideation. describes quite something that is happening in our society more frequently.
That's right.
You know, the number of suicide attempts and the number of suicide successes is really, again, on the rise in our country. You know, the whole terrain of people not taking counseling services, you know, not negatively.
Yeah.
And then the whole stressful environment, the whole rise of depression. And now we see, you know, what you call the big, you know, not just expressed, but actually executed. Now, how do you allow me to ask this on behalf of the viewers, because as a person who is if it's me, because there are two sides to it, I would imagine. There's the person we are living with, you know, and there's me, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about the person we're living with shortly, you know. But as a person, how do I begin to, and I go to this, you know, suicide ideations. Yeah. I mean, what do I do? I mean, what do I do when I get there?
I think the first thing, even before we come there, is to realize that we have different thresholds. Let's talk about two people who lose a job. They may have different thresholds. When they lose their jobs, one person might be affected negatively, and one person may be strengthened and become resilient to fight.
They live on the happy side of life.
Same thing in a family. Where, say, there is a separation or divorce. You have two children. And one child is completely crushed by the divorce and separation of his or her parents. Another child becomes very strong and determined to succeed and to overcome.
Almost set free.
The obstacles. So you meet these people 10 years later, and they are at very different places because we see things differently, we have different perception, and we have different thresholds. Let's now come to the suicide, and I think here again we see that we have different thresholds. Someone may lose their job and continue fighting on, or may come across difficult life circumstances and challenges and be able to continue, you know, to fight on. And
we see this mostly in relationships, especially boyfriend, girlfriend, marriage, husband, wife. You know, that's the larger context of suicide in our society today.
Yes, one person says, I will fight for this marriage. I wanted to succeed. I want to do everything. But another one may be crushed. We don't blame the victim. We don't blame the one who has been crushed. We come in to help. But now talking about suicide ideation again, let me tell you a common recurring story in Kenya, and I read it once every few months. And it is to do with the people who protect us, the great people who protect us, and they have guns, the police. Every few months, I read someplace, it may be Avoduguchi, Kadhonzweni, Kaksingiri, different parts of Kenya, that one person who was licensed to carry an arm got a gun, shot some two people, and shot himself, often out of a love triangle.
These days, they are squares.
They're squares.
we moved from triangles.
That's right.
Squares these days.
Because a relationship is a dyad, marital dyad, two people. It gets triangulated as soon as another person enters that marriage. So there are three different relationships. And then if a fourth person, I'm learning this one from you today. When a fourth one enters, you don't have 4 relationships, you have 6 different relationships between those. So it can get very complicated. And that is what happens. So you look at it and ask, what happened? From the stresses of daily living and work, and from the stresses of a breaking or a broken relationship, a person comes to a point and says, this is the end. I have come to the end. There is nothing further than this. It is not worth living. It is, you see, it is reality testing, a loss of reality testing, that actually life has not ended. one may have lost in this way, but one doesn't lose. If this is a young man who was planning to marry this girl, there are many other girls in the world. There are many other people, other relationships that one can enter even after this is broken, after this is gone. Or it is possible to live single. It is possible to be alone and to, again, one may not see the resources that are available to a person when things go wrong. This is a time to retreat to family, to fellowship, to friends, and ultimately counseling. So this sense of hopelessness that one has come to the end and there is nothing left, that is part of what those who care and those who have empathy, who live with the person, or the counselor begins to address. Let us look at it in reality. The job has been lost, but life has not ended. And now you are able to see other people who lost their job and life became actually better. They were able to do other things. They were able to begin a new career. They were able to take inventory of their skills and be able to move on. Whatever it is, even a death in the family, things like that. What we need to be helpful about is the accumulation of stress, the accumulation of that on an individual.
That accumulation and that suicide ideation, when I begin to feel it accumulating in me, so it's time for me to reach out. As you say, reach out to family, reach out to fellowship, reach out to counseling, right? So summon the little energy I have and say, this is not going nicely, it's time for me to speak, right?
Yes. Successful people have affiliation. They don't live alone, they don't isolate, they don't go to the corner. Usually people, and one doesn't build this when there is a crisis, when there's a death in the family, when there's a job loss. One builds affiliations and relationships in good times. And you know what? If one has correct affiliations, people will begin to say, oh, this man used to play the guitar. He's not playing the guitar anymore.
What's going on?
That's right.
Let's call him up.
Yes, he used to call us. He used to meet with us. He had energy. He had purpose. He was a clear thinker. What is happening now? And they will, some good friends will actually confront and say, what's happening, Tim? What is happening, so and so? And they will. So we can, when we feel that any of these things are wrong, again, successful people in these areas and well people are self-aware, developing self-awareness. So they know what is going on. If I am talking to a neighbor and the neighbor is getting upset, I can begin to sense that anger. But I can also begin to feel my emotion rising. I can begin to feel I'm getting angry, I'm getting upset.
This is not me.
Yes.
This is not the regular me.
Absolutely, and it is time to stop. It's time I retreated from this argument.
And from what you're saying, I hear a question as talk about from self-awareness. What's happening to me?
That's right.
What's happening to me, right?
On a day-to-day basis, as I walk, as the car ahead of me cuts me off on the road, I begin to be constantly aware. What is happening to me? What is my feeling? What is my emotion? And what behavior is likely to trigger that? Now, depression and suicide ideation, as soon as I become aware of that, then I seek help. This help may be talking. People who are married people who are constantly talking to their spouses about how they are feeling, or friends who are often talking to friends about how they are feeling, are more unlikely to reach that point.
And it's interesting that you bring the idea of a positive group as a big asset
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
in a stressful environment.
Yeah.
You know,
That's right.
And you know, it's an investment. It's
Yes.
like one of the things we must invest in
Yeah.
in stressful times.
Yes.
Is really positive friendships.
Correct.
You know, it's interesting that we find them. You know, you bring it out as a big asset, and for viewers, positive group, you know, is important in stressful times. You know, and I'm thinking now of people who are dealing with people who are in a depressive state. You know, you can already see this is my sister. You know, you can see this is my brother. You can see this is my wife. This is my, you know, this is my child, and they're in that state of depression. As maybe one in their environment. I'm not calling myself a caregiver, but I'll call myself an affected person.
Yes.
How am I supposed to process, engage, support?
First of all, there is the issue of empathy and awareness. If one is self-aware, the next step is to be other-aware, to be able, and that's part of emotional intelligence, to be able to understand where the other person is and how the other person is progressing. You watch the behavior, you listen to the words, you watch their body language and to the tone of voice. You begin to see how they are spending time. And at that point, it is easy then to begin to notice that something is going wrong. Today, progressively going wrong, and pointing out that to a person. And offer help, whatever help would be available. But also to be able to determine when outside help is required. For instance, if one notices several triggers, several signs, several symptoms of depression, it is good to ask if there is any suicide ideation. A family ought to be able to sit together and talk about suicide, for instance. You know, there's a lot of suicide. I've read about people commit suicide when they lost on a bet in football or betting, or when they went to an internet program that commanded, where someone gained authority and commanded them to do it. Or I've read about people in love who had a suicide pact that, you know, we will die together. So, and now this is the moment. So it is important for to sit with children and the youth and to sit in the family and discuss those things so that we can know, we can be informed, we can be aware from a non-clinical perspective and be able to agree. This is what we would do. Any one of us who is feeling low and depressed can please talk to us. Let us all talk together. And if any of us ever feels suicidal, let us also talk about it. Because you know what? When people commit suicide, this is often people who succeed in suicide have thought about it for a long time. And they have also tried several times before they succeed. And often it is an attempt to it's a cry for help sometimes. So, and sometimes a successful, if you like it, suicide is a cry for help that went wrong. There are many cases of a person who takes pesticide, painkillers in excess to draw attention. Finally, they come and say, oh, I have taken this. Unfortunately, they are in the body and they cannot be removed. The antidotes may not work fast enough. So some of them were actually calling for help. Or they hanged themselves and it was too tight. They couldn't go back. So it was a bid, it was a cry, it was a call for attention. So those who live with a person who could be suicidal, if they were able to detect it early enough and offer help themselves, and if there is a real plan, when there is a suicide plan, if I'm talking to a client and there's a suicide plan, I sit up. So you have a plan, yes. What is the plan? At that point, one may actually have compulsory help. One may have to be admitted. I refer that person immediately to a psychiatrist who has admission rights and who can give medication. One may have to be taken to hospital and admitted against their will because after a few days they may realize actually it was not that hopeless, the situation.
Okay,
so
and I hear you say that some of the suicides that have happened, successful ones, or the ones that are not successful, even states of depression, a good number of them can be avoided. People don't have to go that low.
They can be avoided. The first thing is that we accept that depression is a sickness. If I have a headache, I say, I have a headache. If my stomach is aching, I say, I have a stomach ache. Depression is a sickness. And depending on the level of that sickness, it can be treated in different ways. Some people need to go to hospital. Otherwise, other people need to avoid, to remove the stressors or to learn how to deal, to work with the stressors that they have. It can be avoided. So it can be avoided, it can be dealt with. People can learn to cope if they are willing to do it. We need just to be aware to realize that it is a sickness. And
there are interventions for it.
There are interventions
finally,
for it.
Finally, it's interesting how, just quickly, time runs. There are children who may not be able to speak for themselves, but they are also growing in a stressful world, right? How, most important, how can we be proactive so that children do not face depression, because they can't speak for themselves. They are at such a tender age of formation. How can parents be proactive, or the community be proactive about that?
That's an interesting question, because it takes us back. Where do our mental illnesses come from? And some of the earlier theorists, and you'll excuse me for going into theory.
That's okay.
Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Carl Rogers. They said, and they studied and found that the problems, the maladjustments, and some of the emotional and mental challenges we face later come from early in life. Sigmund Freud, 3 years, and he divided the 3 years into blocks. If this goes wrong, it's likely to trigger this kind of mental illnesses in the future. And Carl Jung, it's 5 years, and Carl Rogers is 7 years. So much of theory. And what they said, some of the major issues, right from when a child is born, is bonding with the mother. The feeding, the sleeping, toilet training, gender identity. When a child is young, they begin touching themselves. They start touching, exploration, touching their genitals, and how we react to that. And then the socialization to the family itself and to the wider world. How do those things happen? When these things go wrong, sometimes it brings issues
in the future.
Security, guilt, shame, all those issues that affect our personality in such a way that they predispose us to mental illness, among them depression. So you can see that the family can begin quite early. But now, assuming the children is in school, one of them is not to be sources of stress for the children.
Okay. So as a parent,
yes,
as a guardian,
yes,
purpose,
yes,
you know, it's a purpose, deliberate stance,
yes,
that will not be, I will not be a source of stress
to
for
the
this
child.
Okay.
For the child, a lot of stress comes around education, around socializing and mixing with the other children. A child may be introverted, and wants to spend more time indoors. And once they are pushed, they begin to be pushed out there. Why are you not like other children?
Yeah, because we live in an extroverted world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of noise around us, and a child might just prefer the quieter side of life. So to make sure that we are not the stressors and we are not the sources of stresses for the children. The other thing is to help children develop shock absorbers. This life is not easy, and it has never been. It is not in our generation that it is not easy. And it is important for children to know there will be disappointment, there will be failure, there will be bad judgment on my part that will have repercussions. You know, all those. Now, there will be a point in time when I cannot proceed. What do I escape from it? Do I escape from situations? Or do I face them and learn from them and face my challenges? I think beginning to talk about challenges and allowing our children to experience their challenges and to fight reasonable battles. We are also protectors for our children, so if they are facing unreasonable challenges, then of course that's different. But beginning to show them that there are battles to fight, there is competition. We live in our world, in a world where we have to exercise discretion and judgment, where there is delayed gratification. We work hard in school so that we enjoy income and life later. We abstain from sex so that we enjoy marriage. We don't eat now everything so that there is food in the future. We save now so that we can be rich later. All those challenges, teaching the children to face the challenges of daily living for a child in the context of childhood. Sharing. Life does not revolve around my son or daughter. They share. They learn to share. They learn to relate with other people. All those will help. And then finally, for us to realize that there are those who will be predisposed to mental illness. Maybe because of chemical imbalance, maybe because of genetics. It's still not very well understood, but there is a chance that if there is a depressive person in a family, in a lineage, if there are depressed people, there is a higher proportion for depression. So even to face the reality that in a family, there may be a depressive person, and therefore prepare for challenges, that mental illness, depression is sickness, it's illness, and it could come to any of us in a family. If it comes, let us be prepared to deal with it. Let us be prepared not to hide the person who has it. Let us be prepared to support the one to whom it comes.
Tim,
yes,
very enlightening, very, very enlightening. And I'm sure the viewers have benefited a lot from these insights. And as you continue in this practice, may your practice continue to be fruitful, because what you've just shared here is definitely going to shift a lot of minds that have been watching this program. Viewers, we've been talking about depression, and what we have learned from our team is that yes, there is depression, but there is a lot we can do about it to make our lives richer. Therefore, step out, reach out, and for a person who you see is not reaching out, help them to reach out, because there is help. There is help. There is help. This has been Spotlight. Thanks for watching.